Let's talk about gains. See, you have something called size. You get your muscles bigger, you add more meat onto your frame, and then over here you have strength, which is your ability to produce force, to jump high, to lift heavy shit, and thus justify your existence on planet Earth. And when you combine those things together, the scientists refer to that as gains. Now there's a third dimension that people miss that is integral to gains, and that is clout, usually in the form of internet compliments. Now for strength, normally we force this through a funnel of functional. You have to ask, does this lift make me stronger at real world scenarios that I will probably never encounter? If it does, congratulations, those are gains. And for size, you might be the type of person who thinks I'm not going to be satisfied until people look at my delts and mistake them for the testicles of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Is this lift going to get me closer to T-Rex testy shoulders? If so, those are gains. And then the third one, the big one, will people be impressed if I post this lift online? And no matter how good you are with the first two, that's where you are always going to lose points. See, it doesn't matter if Mr. Israel gets himself 30-inch arms. You can tell how many gains you're going to get from something based on the ratio of positive to negative comments. With this ratio, there's just no gains. It's not my rule. I didn't make it up. The numbers are right there. Now, the internet likes to do what it does, take small differences and blow it up into a controversial topic. For some reason, one of the oldest, most productive, most beloved, most contested movements that is low tech, easily accessible to everybody, and produces very consistent, very predictable growth. It's on the chopping block. Overhead pressing, people are asking, is it worth doing? Is it going to give you gains? So let's get to the bottom of it right now. This is how to overhead press for no gains. All right, we good? Some barbell apparel gear. This is why I don't wear white. Sir Teddy got macaroni on it and I'm not happy. But what can I say? The boy eats food like his father. It's not about coordination, it's about quantity. Now, the first way to overhead press for no gains is to actually overhead press in the first place. What? Anybody gonna type straw man into the comments? Let's go. So let's see what the disciples of science have to say about overhead pressing for gains.
People who like the overhead press really like the overhead press. And I can see why. It does provide high tension on the shoulders in the stretched position. You can overload it extremely well. Even though the lift tends to be a stubborn lift, you can usually add a little weight or a rep, or at least improve your technique in some way. And I think that once you nail the technique down, it's a very gratifying lift.
So the Knitman takes a pretty measured approach. There are some things he likes, and there's some shortcomings. No pun intended, Jeff.
However, it does have two downsides. For one, it's very anterior delt dominant. When we look at activation patterns across the delt heads, you see that the side and rear heads aren't activated much with the overhead press. And for two, because you're standing, it's not the most stable. I'm putting it in B tier plus.
Now, I always saw the lack of side and rear delt activation as kind of a weird complaint. Everybody talks about the front delts like they're already taken care of, like benching is good enough as a stimulus. Let me tell you, you're not gonna get those veiny dino eggs by doing bench only.
It trains, due to angle of push, the front delts significantly more than any other exercise and better than any other exercise. So if you want unreal front delt hypertrophy, the overhead barbell press is a very good place to start.
And there it is, clear as day, guys. You can't confuse it. Mr. Mike telling you that it's literally the best thing you can do for your front delts and your triceps. It's a great starting point. And he put that in a video titled, Why You Should Never Overhead Press. It's clear. Now over here we have Jeff, God bless him, giving his S tier plus movement his best overall shoulder developer.
And if I had to pick one exercise as the best of the best for overall shoulder development, I think I'd go with the cable lateral raise. It's easy to do, it's super effective, and it ticks all the boxes for hypertrophy.
And this is where the tier lists get a little bit weird because you got to be clear about what it is you're actually ranking it on. When I think of something being S tier, I think of bang for the buck. This is going to do more by itself than anything else. So if there's only one thing you can do, it should be this. And I don't think there's anybody that actually believes that somebody is more likely to get big ass delts by doing this weird side lateral cable thingy compared to a guy who's stuck on an island with a barbell and the only thing he can do to soothe his loneliness is press it overhead. And I'm not saying this is what Jeff is actually saying because he seems like a pretty reasonable guy. I want to be charitable, but it seems easy to interpret this as saying that, hey, if there's only one thing you can do, this is going to be the thing that gets you that big juicy stegosaurus sack. But the real Achilles heel of the overhead press, must stimulus to fatigue ratio.
Creates so much spinal loading and so much requisite for stability. The fatigue is really high. And the stimulus to fatigue ratio of almost any other delt exercise is usually better than overhead barbell press.
Now, I don't doubt for a second that stimulus to fatigue is a lot higher with standing barbell presses. I'm just skeptical that people are blowing their back outs and ruining their shoulder workout because of their 3x8 with 185 standing strict press. Just because something does exist doesn't mean it's of consequence. You can always fixate on the minutia. You can count grains of sand. The question is to your audience, does it mean a goddamn thing? And this certainly doesn't. And when you say, oh, well, funny enough, bodybuilders tend to do most of their work seated. Why not just do that?
I'm not a big fan of seated barbell overhead presses. There's something manly that's removed from the exercise, specifically the standing upright.
If you do them seated, you do fix the stability issue, but since they're still very front delt dominant, and there's something about the seated OHP that just isn't as satisfying as the standing OHP, I'm going to leave these in B tier as well.
Jeff and Mike say the exact same thing about solving it that way, which is it's not as cool. And that's proof positive that my definition of gains, which included clout as the most positive variable, is in fact scientifically backed. When you're trying to pick exercises to emphasize in your training, there's a bunch of different reasons you would, and it has to go beyond what the marginal differences were in an EMG reading. We like barbell compound movements because they give a lot of bang for the buck, meaning if you do that and only that, you're gonna get pretty good results. It's gonna cover a lot of bases. They're also fun. They're easily accessible and low tech. They have progressibility, which means they are easy to push forward and people tend to stick with them for very long times. They are culturally relevant. People recognize it. It's tested in different sports. It anchors you deeper into the world of barbell sports, which of course is a subset of clout, which means gains. And there's a lot of lifters that are being either misinformed or they're interpreting the content wrong to come to the conclusion that they're either not going to be as strong or as big as they potentially could, or even that they're not going to get very big at all. So here's some questions I think are important with regards to the overhead press, even if hypertrophy really is your only goal. It's not often I talk to you hypertrophy only guys because I barely consider you human, but today we're going to build some bridges. Does Jeff believe his S-tier movement really matches pressing? And if he doesn't, should he work a little bit harder to clarify that? I'm also curious if the evidence-based guys think or have any research to back up what the effect is of combining different movements. For example, is having a hypertrophy program that includes a heavy overloaded compound movement like overhead pressing paired with smaller isolation movements better than, worse than, or just as good as having only isolation movements? I think most people would guess that it's better, but some of the evidence-based content is so focused on individual traits like stretch or range of motion that they might lead you to believe that it's worse. And the truth is the research probably doesn't cover it one way or another. I'd also ask how important progressibility is, not just liking a movement, but the nature of a movement, having elasticity so that you can always add a rep or easily add a little bit of weight, or that you're excited to move it forward, because the fact is barbell movements have that way ahead of something like an isolated cable movement. I believe a bodybuilding program that has heavy pressing in it is probably better than the one that doesn't. I'm also going to assume that the people watching this type of content on average have strength as some part of their goal. If being stronger is at least 10% of your overall goal, you are absolutely justified exploiting the carryover you get from barbell movements that will make you stronger in addition to reliably adding muscle mass. In that situation, it's not just justified, it's actually necessary. Now that we got that out of the way, if we are in fact going to incorporate barbell overhead pressing specifically for the purpose of hypertrophic growth, how would we go about that?
Is keep the load close to your face, and then you will hit your side delts better, your traps better. It's not just all front delts. That's very good.
So according to Israel, you're going to get more middle delt growth if the bar is back closer, if your elbows are more flared. This is mimicked in dumbbell pressing. It's mimicked in machine pressing. Unfortunately, you can't do it with a barbell because your stupid face is in the way. Or is it? Once again, I'm going to say suck it, nerds, because a behind the neck press solves this very problem. It's movements like these that bypass the need to have an actual chart where somebody's breaking down the biomechanics of the movement to guess if it's good at hypertrophy. Do 15 reps on a front press, wait about 10 minutes, do 15 reps behind the neck. You tell me the difference. So that's enough hypertrophy talk. I gotta go take a shower now. If we know that the movement pattern of pressing a bar overhead grants strength, if we know that a full range of motion and having your elbows flared hits most of your deltoid in a very substantial way, the only missing piece is the most important, the clout factor. How do people look at a behind the neck press with a lot of weight? I give to you Russian weightlifting muscle icon Dmitry Klokov, who is quite a big deal 8 to 10 years ago in not only weightlifting, but the CrossFit scene. And he was known for popularizing the Klokov press, which is a brutally difficult movement that also lights up the ever-loving shit of your deltoids. Now, some of the things Klokov was known for is doing a 225 one-arm snatch. In fact, he was said to have been able to hit a 440 hang snatch within an hour of having woken up. and he even had a brutal strict press of 375. In addition to that, he's about as close to a sex symbol as we get in this weirdo niche that we compete in. So is it a coincidence that the guy that popularized behind the neck pressing checks all those boxes? I don't think so. In fact, I think it's about clear-cut cause and effect as anybody can get. I'd also like to point to Ted Arcidi, who is one of the biggest benchers in the world, knocking on a 700-pound bench, and he is famous for his iconic pictures of taking big weight behind the neck and saying that it is without a doubt one of the best accessory and growth and development movements that one can do. And of course, there are endless pictures of Arnold and many other pro bodybuilders going deep on the behind the neck press, and in the process, they built some of the biggest shoulders in the world that could easily be mistaken for brontosaurus balls. Now, this movement has long been established historically, and we just got confirmation from the evidence-based crew that it should, in theory, work as well as people claim that it does. You need a true vertical press if you do want to capitalize on shoulder hypertrophy. So for those reasons, its capacity to improve strength, size, and the clout that you're going to get when you take anything over 135 and do full range standing behind the neck presses, this is an S+ tier movement, hands down. Yeah, I guess we're doing that. I guess we're doing a tier list. I didn't know either. So for anybody looking to suck the soul out of their training by trying to optimize every little imaginary margin, I kind of agree with Mr. Mike. Yeah, you shouldn't overhead press. You should behind the neck press. Oh, hello? You're looking for who? Oh, it's your gains calling. They want to know why you're late for picking them up. Guys, if you want to hit the holy trifecta of gains, the size, the strength, and of course the clout, you need a program that checks the biggest boxes. Not only does it use the best time-tested movements that you are actually likely to stick to and improve on, but it includes a logical progression that is based on my most popular programs. These are programs that have gotten rave reviews from people that literally just ran the template. BaseStrengthLP uses 3 of the most proven templates pulled from the principles of some of the biggest, strongest men in history that have been used for over a century. The workouts are fun, intuitive, there's a logical progression, but it does take it up a notch because it personalizes the workouts to you. As you get bigger, stronger, more advanced, it becomes harder to tick those numbers forward, and you can't get by not adjusting your workouts to your own particular tolerances. Now, most people get an online coach to take care of that for them to the tune of $200 to $300 a month, and the rest of the people just never figure it out to begin with. So if you're wondering why you start every training cycle super excited only to get several weeks in, feel brittle, overtrained, tired, disillusioned, like you're just a dodgeball and the program is the side of a building, then you need direction that updates your training minute to minute, day to day, week to week based on your immediate feedback. BaseStrengthLP takes the guesswork out of training, and it does what only an online coach can do, which is personalize the program to you at 1/10 of the cost. Yes, 1/10 of the cost. So jump on the heart and soul of old school training. It's my programming, but it is your program and you cannot get that anywhere else. Hit up basestrength.com today to get started on your gains. Now, the next way to overhead press for no gains should come as no surprise to anybody, and that is to cheat. We all know that cheating is the worst thing you can do because it violates the most important thing of getting gains, and that is technique. What technique that is exactly, we don't know, and the people commenting don't either. It's a vibe thing. It's like porn. You can't define it, but you know it when you see it. So to understand how overhead press gains work with respect to cheating, let's get a lay of the land. Let's show the spectrum of overhead lifts from most strict, most manly, most authentic, to most cheatery. Now, most people know what a jerk is. It's what Olympic lifters do extraordinarily well and what CrossFitters and strongmen do really poorly. So given that your functional Red Dawn fantasies probably involve having some actual pressing ability, jerks aren't actually going to help with that at all. It doesn't carry over to much. In fact, it doesn't even make you better at other types of jerking. For size, it doesn't do shit either, and we don't even need to get into the science. You can just look at Olympic lifters. The fact is, you can move world record weight while theoretically looking like a level 1 toothpick. And then there's clout. Now, you will get clout for having a good jerk if you're an Olympic lifter in Olympic lifting circles, but for anybody else who tries to utilize it, you automatically get the stamp of cheating, so all of your gains go to zero anyways. Even strongmen, where anything goes, it's the Wild West, they'll use a sloppy jerk that wasn't even technical, where they probably wasted more energy than they saved, and despite having like 500 pounds over their head, you'll still have the internet comments saying, it's not a real press, get out of here with that. And because the jerk has the biggest potential for weight overall, it puts strongmen in kind of a pickle. It's just like sumo for powerlifting. Do you want to build the technical proficiency you need to do well in the sport, or do you want to be able to look at yourself in the mirror? So for size, strength, and clout, we're going to put the jerk as a D tier lift all the way around. Now, a true military press is as strict as it gets. Imagine doing a barbell overhead press on a bench set to 90 degrees, except you're standing and your heels are together. Now, the truth is, despite being called military, this really is the most beta version that you can do. The fixation on form creates an unnecessary awkwardness. It doesn't really make it a very good test of strength, and it's also really shitty as a developer. Nobody really does this, and the only reason we talk about it is because it exists in the imaginations of low-level lifters that think anything that isn't this must be some form of cheating and therefore doesn't really count. It's the same type of people that think arm wrestlers shouldn't use their body. No, bro, you gotta do it like this. You gotta look straight ahead. It's just like this, that's it. That other shit's cheating, bro. That doesn't count. Now, even though the applause from technique cyborgs would theoretically make for non-zero gains, I'm still gonna put it in D tier because for size and strength, it's one of the worst ways to go about it. Now that brings us to the unholy hybrid, the push press, which is almost worse as a cheater movement because a jerk is like upfront about what it is, but a push press, it's like you're trying to finish with the press. It's like you're trying to get the credit of a strict press. Like nobody's gonna notice that snappy knee bend that gave a shit ton of momentum at the start. It's just dishonest. But here's the truth. Push press actually does something extraordinarily unique for upper body development, and that is that it generates a shit ton of momentum at the start, which requires you to push as fast as possible the whole way through. No matter how many reps, what the weight is, it forces you to move explosively. And the explosive action of the knees and hips, which may or may not be useful to you depending on if you're an athlete or if, like the rest of us, you're here because athletics actually wasn't for you. If you're a bodybuilder, you might go until your shoulders give out, but by jumping into the weight, you can gain more repetitions and get a bigger stimulus. And for strongmen who do the push press as a main lift in their trade, only they can tell you what a training block that involves sets of 10 across on a push press does to the shoulders compared to just about anything else that you can do. It is by itself a fantastic developer, but it also happens to be one of the best ways to get weight overhead, which satisfies your fantasies of developing real world strength. And we've seen some of the biggest lifts in history go down in a push press. The biggest log pressers in history, Eddie Hall, Zadrunas, Iron Bibi, they all used some small compact push press. Our sexy lifting icon Klokov is famous for doing this 496 push press, looking like he weighs about 235. Now the thing about cheating is people sleep on it. It's one thing to ego lift and completely lose the plot on what you're trying to do by monkey fucking weights, but a controlled cheat is an extraordinarily useful way to increase the stimulus of what you're doing, or at the very least do something different. I would love to see some evidence-based guys argue the fact that croc rows actually aren't as stimulating as they could potentially be if you did them strict or on a machine or with some different movement pattern that emphasizes the stretch. And that's all a push press is. It's essentially a croc row for your upper body. And let's not forget that just about every isolation machine you're ever going to see in the gym is built with a cam system specifically to smooth out the strength curve, which is essentially what this does. And of course, clout gains are supercharged with the push press because when people think that you're going in to do a set of squats and then they see you clip off 10 reps with a little bit of leg drive, their jaws still hit the floor. And this gets you the best type of clout. It's a praise that like people can't even relate to. It actually sidesteps the old guy coming up to you and being like, you know, I used to do that when I was your age. It's just as much people being impressed and awestruck as confused, and that's exactly where you want your enemies, confused. So for strength, I'm gonna say a push press is absolutely S tier. And for hypertrophy, I'm honestly gonna put it as A tier if you train it with sufficient volume and effort for higher reps, which almost nobody actually does. Push presses are A tier for getting closer to having Velociraptor vas deferens. All right, we're good, we're still in it. Now we're not done on the topic of cheating. We gotta talk about another insidious movement that has snuck its way into the annals of history. Remember I talked about the people that are always in the comments about exactly how much backbend existed on that strict military press video? They're gonna be super happy about this because now I'm calling out the standing incline press. For some brave souls out there, the spine is just an obstacle to the real goal of lifting, which is just maximal leverage at all costs. So just as the bendy benchers learned that they could remove ribs to suck their own I mean, gain an advantage in powerlifting by increasing their arch. Clever overhead pressers learned that they could do something similar and turn their overhead press into an incline bench. And this shows the natural movement of pressing. All movements are on the same trajectory, moving to their inevitable final conclusion, which is the standing dip. Now, there's a few reasons you might lay back when you're pressing. One is you meant to do a strict press, but damn it, you wanted to get the weight up, and the best way to do that turned out to be to wiggle yourself back a little bit to gain a little bit of an advantage. God help you if you're training for hypertrophy and those were the last 2 reps of the 15 rep set you did, because people are going to tell you the reps don't count and therefore all gains go by the wayside. Now, the other reason to do it is for the sake of it, and this is for the people that are competing to move the most weight overhead by any means necessary. Now, it stands to reason that the theoretical limits of overhead pressing is going to come from people with the most gains, people that have the most strength with the most size and are using the best technique, not for growth, but for clout. The best guys in strongman get really good at executing a minor layback, again, because it allows them to move more odd objects while maintaining stability, but also because it brings in their upper pecs. So you have greater musculature being used in service of putting the actual weight overhead. Now that sounds like what our good buddy Mark Ripito believes is the best way to arrange the technique for any lift, to arbitrarily engage as much muscularity as possible, which is why he promotes his hip dominant squat variation, because in his mind, the correct way to do a squat is the one that has the most musculature involved.
You're going to use a horizontal hip movement with locked knees to generate a little bounce.
Okay.
This is like a drawn bow. And your armpit, your tricep, and your lat are tight. Squeeze, man. Now look what the bar is going to do in your hand. It's going to go down and up.
This movement starts with a hip pop instead of actual knee bend. So you get some momentum out of the hole, but not a lot, and it hinges on this very nuanced, very technical execution. So it kind of does the same thing as leg drive, but worse, and it's less technically accessible. And in addition to that, they will do it with a double layback, meaning you do a layback to initiate the press off your chest, but then you follow it up with a deep backward bend, essentially turning this into a no-knee jerk. Now, one of the most famous athletes to come out of this school is Chase Lindley, who at a not excessively high body weight did this very technique to do a 405 quote-unquote strict press. Now, while this is firmly within the rules of the Strength Lifting Federation that Mark Ripito created that contains this lift, it still gets roasted to the high heavens. And 405 overhead press or not, you can just look at Chase's sub 17-inch arms and the fact that the internet comments aren't having it, and you can say, I guess it's no gains. Now, the funny thing is that while people will roast Chase for doing something that is objectively as impressive as this, because it doesn't meet the imaginary standard of the strict heels together, no bend military press, nobody in strongman is faulting like Mitch Hooper for the sick layback that he's gotten, or any of the other guys that effectively use that to manhandle world record weights in the log, axle, block, sandbag, and keg press. And these types of strength sports is exactly what Ripito is calling back to. See, to really get a handle on layback pressing, we got to go back, and I mean way back. See, Olympic lifting initially had the press in it, and it used to be done in a very strict style. And eventually, as the Soviets pushed forward the thoughts of what was possible in the Olympic lifts, technique would similarly evolve. Now, Serge Redding was a Belgian weightlifter, and on this day, he walked up to a bar loaded with 502 pounds. That's well over the current strongman axle record. And not only did he clean it straight to his shoulders, but he pressed it overhead with essentially no knee drive. This was good enough to take the all-time Olympic strict record. Now, Serge competed in the 60s and 70s, and this was generally the golden era of not just bodybuilding, but lifting. It was back when D-ball was changing the face of bodybuilding, when powerlifters were making squat suits out of bed sheets, and when Olympic lifters were pushing the limits of human drug tolerance and crediting their progress to periodization. Of course, one man's cheater is another man's freedom fighter, and the best cheaters didn't stop at gaming equipment or exploiting pharmaceuticals. They got a handle on technique as well. So what Serge displayed here was an absolute monstrous demonstration of strength, absolutely, but it was paired with expertly crafted technique that was designed to lift the most amount of weight within the confines of the rules, and boy did they play fast and loose with what the rules were. Now, there's a funny thing about Serge is that his video still gets shared around quite a bit, even though this record only stood for like 3 minutes. It was actually passed up by one of the greatest Olympic weightlifters of all time, Russian weightlifter Vasily Alexiev, and he repeated the feat with 507. Now, people still give Serge love because his press seems to be closer to within the actual definition of the rules, where Vasily played a little bit looser. And as people turned a blind eye to soft knees and excessive hip swing, Vasily would actually go on to press 521 pounds in this exact style. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this is probably one of the hidden secrets for unchained upper body hypertrophy. I am going to classify this as a uniquely useful and valuable lift because it's an improvement on the push press. See, in strongman, you need stability when handling these unruly objects, and a push press allows for that. But if you can lean back, you can bring in bigger musculature, theoretically press more weight. You can even push yourself away from the weight like a bent press, which in and of itself is closer to a jerk than an actual press. The potential for weight is absolutely huge if you can do it right. Now, a great example of this is Russian weightlifting champ Misha Kokolaev, who's one of the greatest strongmen of this century. He clean and jerked 550. He behind the neck jerked right around 600 pounds. And in this face-off with one of the greatest pressers of all time, Zydrunas Savickas, Misha, who was one of the best overhead athletes in the world, failed to match Z on the log press. And the reason is because modern Olympic weightlifting didn't emphasize any strict pressing or layback pressing. It was almost entirely based around the jerk, which sacrifices the basic stability and strength you need to execute any of these other overhead feats. So Kokolaev, who on a barbell would technically be able to put up more weight than Zydrunas, suffered on the log because it was just too awkward. He had to stick with the jerk, but it didn't pay dividends. He was taken out by Z's stronger, more stable pressing style. Now, in recent years, we've seen pressers move towards more of a deliberate layback style. This is strongman Jesse Nelson, one of the strongest middleweight pressers I've ever seen in my life, who's gone well over 400 pounds in this cheater layback style press. And all of the comments say the exact same thing, standing incline press. But you know what? When you look like a goddamn 49er from the gold rush era, San Francisco. I mean, this guy looked like he just came out of the coal mines. He looks like he has 4 extra Y chromosomes. And where other guys are trying to start their strongman career gaming the overhead press with their silly jerks, he's like, nah, I think I'll just like press it up with my arms. But when you pair a little bit of leg drive into this type of movement with the athletes pushing themselves back, that is actually where the greatest potential for weight is going to be in things like the log press. So where Eddie Hall and Iron Bibi might strict press a bit more weight than Vasily did and do it smoother, the fact is the trade-off with the versatility isn't even close. You still have a strict-ish press with over 500 pounds. You have a guy that could clean and jerk 564 in contests and snatch well over 400 pounds. So it begs a question, if Kokolaev actually came out of that era of lifting, what would his capacity be for handling these unruly implements? Would he in fact have been able to take on Zydrunas Savickas right around his prime? So like I said, it's funny that people look at this and they immediately have a reaction that leads them to leave a strong opinion in the comments. It doesn't mean anything because Chase Lindley gets all kinds of shit for doing this in a federation that allows it, but everybody was on Jesse Nelson's nuts, rightfully so, when he almost set the middleweight log press record by doing his layback. It shows the fickle nature of gym culture, which makes it hard to predict gains when the most important thing to your gains, clout, is always changing. I mean, everybody used to say that not touching your chest on a bench press was cheating. What's the point? It's ego lifting. It's lame. There's no reason to do it, until some bench-only gym bro from Nevada came out of nowhere and beat Scott Mendelson's fucking 715 bench record. And now not touching your chest on a bench press is called a Spoto press and everybody does it.
And there's something about the seated OHP that just isn't as satisfying as the standing OHP.
There's something manly that's removed from the exercise.
So where was I? Oh yeah, the layback press. By itself, I'd call it, I don't know, B for strength. It's probably not going to carry over to anything else unless you're really interested in doing it just cause, or you actually do compete in something like strongman. I would probably recommend that you use other methods for general size and strength. But also there were a lot of Olympic lifting and physique guys that did similar shit back in the day and they got really good at it. So if you love practicing new skills, it might not hurt to spend a little bit of time with it just to get it in your repertoire. John was very arguably in the pre-steroid era. He looked like $1 million and oh, by the way, he was strong as balls. It was probably because he didn't avoid stuff like this. Unfortunately, the peasants on IG can't recognize this act of beauty for what it actually is. I could call it C for size. I don't know what the fucking point of putting this in a hypertrophy tier list is. Nobody's doing this for hypertrophy. Just know that it's not going to make you smaller. Guys, stop deconstructing everything into the ground. When you're doing a press, you're there to press. You're getting the benefits that pressing provides. It's not going to do your taxes. It's not going to find your girlfriend. And it's probably not going to grow your rear delt as much as doing rear delt flies. You want your middle delts to pop, do a normal shoulder workout, and make sure you finish off with side raises. You're going to be a-okay. If there was one parlor trick lift that I would have most average gym goers do, it probably wouldn't be a split jerk. It probably wouldn't be like a one-arm bent press. It would probably be this layback press variation because it still uses a lot of musculature. ever, and it opens a door for a lot of other cool shit if you ever do decide to transition to something that involves handling unruly objects and pressing them overhead, which satisfies our Viking stone lifting ancestors. So that's all I got for today, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.